Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well today. It is officially December now, countdown to Christmas. I don't know how it's happened, but it has happened. And I have attempted to make my backgrounds look a little bit cozier and a little bit more Christmassy. And I do think I might have overdone it a little bit. I'm looking at it on camera and it looks insanely cluttered, but just know that the thought was there. But today I thought what we could do is we could go through and do a little repotting chat, do some planty things together and have a chat about some of the things that commonly go wrong at this time of year. I think you can be really kind of steady and stable with your plants, and then the winter months hit and everything seems to just spiral out of control. There's lots of questions that people often have, lots of unknowns, things like grow lights and pests and browning edges and yellowing leaves and all this sort of stuff. So I think today the plan is to simplify some of those things and hopefully make things a little bit more understandable and easier. But first, if you're new here, hi, my name's Claire and this is Yoli. I make videos all about houseplant care, sharing tips and tricks I've learnt over the years to help keep your plants happy and healthy. And yeah, so over these last few months, I've been compiling all of the questions that you've been asking about winter-related plant drama. So hopefully we can answer all of those things today and make life a little bit easier. So yes, I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. So the first thing that I want to start with today is something that is long overdue and I've been meaning to do for ages. And that is firstly pot up my Philodendron Glorious and get it onto a bigger moss pole, because currently it is just growing in a cup in moss, and that's exactly how it's been since I got the plant, which was quite a while ago now. And as you can see, it is completely growing off its moss pole. So this is a bit of a fiddly job, to be honest. I've been putting it off for a reason, but I thought we could just chat as I start with this one. I'm hoping I'll get around to other things as well, because I have got such a long list of planty things that I want to do today. But I thought I would start with the question that probably answers itself based on what I'm doing. But one of the most common questions, I don't know where to put my coffee. Okay, go down there. One of the most common questions that I get from you guys is, can I still repot my plants over the winter months? And as I say, like obviously I am very much an all year round repotter. I do pretty much the exact same thing to my plants in that respect all year round. I don't really change much, but that is because I feel confident that I'm able to keep my plants condition stable. And if, for example, you feel like, I don't know, we'll get on to things like grow lights and stuff as we get into the video, but if you feel like you're not able to put certain measures in place in order to keep your plants growing and in order to keep them as happy as they possibly can be and replicating their natural habitat, if you're not able to do that, then I would say probably don't repot all year round, just because if you do, you risk sending your plant into shock, because chances are your plant is going to be going through a lot of environmental changes over the winter months anyway. Like most of the plants that we grow as houseplants are tropical plants. They're used to high levels of heat, light, humidity. And if you take, for example, a British winter, that could not be more different. And whilst plants are very, very adaptable, sometimes you've got to kind of think to yourself, right, do I want to unnecessarily stress my plant during this time, or do I want to just keep things stable and leave my repotting for the spring? And I know there's lots and lots of growers that choose to do that. But as I say, I have over the years and in my time kind of having plants and learning about plants, I have tried to put as much in place as possible so that I can kind of get the best out of my plants all year round. And a lot of that is not actually complicated stuff. Like this plant here, the one that I'm working with, the Philodendron Glorious, this one doesn't have any kind of special conditions. The only thing that I've done light-wise for this one at this time of year is I've moved it closer to my window. But there are some plants that are super, super sensitive, like alocasias, for example, and you need to be a little bit, maybe a little bit more careful with them. But no, in a nutshell, as I say, if you are able to keep the conditions of your plants stable, then there's no reason at all that you can't repot, propagate, change out moss poles, do everything as normal all year round. And I think as well that is kind of the nice thing about growing plants as houseplants, because obviously you are way more so than like if you're talking about outdoor garden plants, you are way more in control of your plant's conditions because you create the conditions. So if anything, you're almost at a bit of an advantage. And I don't think people think of it that way very often. And before I carry on, I'm actually just thinking, this is one thing, this is an area where I often go wrong myself. I often spent ages getting my plants out of moss. And as you can see, this one has got an insane root system. I often spend ages getting them out of moss, and then by the time I've like mixed up my soil and everything, the roots have started to dry out, particularly if they are quite spindly. So I think I might just mix up some soil now and then I will carry on or go back to that. I'm very disorganized today. I've just brought, oh my God, it's just chaos. Everything over. I've got about 3 different soil mixes, kind of the dregs of them mixed up. But typically for philodendron, which is what this one is, I do like to use quite a chunky mix. So I'm going to use, I'm never like, as you guys know, I'm never specific about my measurements, and nor do I think you have to be. But I'm just going to use a little bit of bark. This is orchid bark, and I haven't got a huge amount left actually. This is really hard to get hold of at the moment. I've heard that a lot of places are just having trouble from suppliers here in the UK, so this is the last of it, and I don't know when I'm going to be able to get some more in. But yeah, and then I've also got some worm castings, which are brilliant for just like natural fertilisation. If I've got them to hand, I typically add a little bit into my mixes. Again, I'm not super specific with this. I'm just going to do a little cupful. And I probably won't use everything that's in this bowl, and then that can carry over into my next mix as well. I throw a bit of tree fern fibre in there as well, because why not? Again, the texture is just brilliant for aeration. Really good for spindly roots as well, because obviously spindly roots on plants can be overwhelmed much easier by water and therefore can be much more susceptible to root rot, which again is something we're going to talk very much about in this video, because root rot, oh my God, is an issue that you can face at any time of year. However, during the winter months, it is something that can bring down your plants so quickly. In fact, let's talk about that now. I'm going in a very strange order with these questions, but basically, as you might know, or you might have found out yourself, I definitely have in the worst ways over the years, but when the temperature drops and your plants aren't getting as much light, even if they're getting, like even if you move them much closer to a window, the light they're receiving is going to be less intense and the hours of light are going to be less. They're not going to be photosynthesizing at the same rate, and therefore they're actually not going to need as much water as you think they might. And therefore, if you do accidentally overwater, and whenever I say overwater as well, I just mean giving your plant water when it's not ready for any more water. I don't mean giving it too much in one session. But yeah, if you give your plant too much water when it's not ready for it, then it can lead to root rot, and that is just like oh God, it is such a pain to deal with. It is, if you catch it very early, it is absolutely possible to save your plants from root rot. But if you don't spot the signs early on, it can be so hard to save your plant from root rot. And some of the common things to look for, and this I think is why it's so difficult to spot root rot sometimes, some of the common things to look for are things like yellowing leaves, brown patches on the leaves with a yellow ring around them, just drooping. Anything out of character for your plants can be linked to root rot. But the difficult thing with it is that almost anything can be a symptom of root rot, because it depends how your specific type of plant chooses to show that. So I always say, if you are in any doubt, at any time of year really, but specifically over the winter months, if you're in any doubt, just have a look at the roots. I will typically just, it doesn't mean you have to completely repot your plant, but just lift it out of its container, kind of like I've done here, and just have a little look. And typically healthy roots should be full and pale and healthy. As you can see, these ones are quite spindly, but they still look very, very healthy. And if they are not pale and thin and healthy, then chances are that is where your problems lie. I've made specific breakdown videos on dealing with root rot before, but typically what I will do if I do find that my roots are starting to rot, I will chop back all of the roots to the point where they look healthy again. If you're in doubt, chop a little bit higher just because you only want healthy roots left. Then depending on how bad the rot is, if it's really, really bad, or it has been really, really bad, and you think that you might not have removed all of it, I will use a very mild hydrogen peroxide mixed with water, let the roots soak for a while, and then repot the plant. Sometimes as well, I'll get it into sphagnum moss or something like that, just so that it's not going straight back into soil and you can monitor the roots a little bit better as they regrow. Also, I was going to say, now I've mixed that up, I'm going to just put it to one side, but it is ready to go when I need it. And now I can focus on getting this plant off its current moss pole and get these roots untangled. But yeah, overwatering is the biggest killer in houseplants, and I say it all the time. I have banged on about it for years, but I always say that underwatering is better than overwatering. And that doesn't mean that you should let all of your plants dry out to bone dry and kind of get to the point of near death before you water them again. It just means that in general, if you're not quite sure, leave it a little bit longer and then come back to it, because it is typically so much easier to bring a plant back from too little water as opposed to too much. So yeah, I think also in the winter months when we've got the central heating on and stuff like that, you can kind of be fooled into thinking that your plants might be ready for a drink before they actually are, because if the environment is like superficially a lot warmer because you've got the radiators blasting, the soil might feel quite dry, but if you don't properly like stick your finger down in there and check and feel the weight of the pot, it might actually still have loads of moisture in it, but you might think it's dried out quicker because of the environment, if that makes sense. So again, if you're not a particularly confident plant parent, or you just don't trust your own judgment, this is where things like moisture meters can be really, really, really useful. You can get them on Amazon, they're not that expensive to buy, and you just stick them down into the soil of your plant and they will give you a reading as to how wet or dry it is, kind of deep down in there. I know there's been a little bit of, I was going to say controversy, a little bit of talk in the plant community recently about how accurate moisture meters actually are, because especially for those of us that are growing in very chunky substrates, for example, like with lots of bark and stuff like that in, I think it's a good idea to get a few readings, to basically get a reading from multiple areas in your pot instead of just going off one, because yeah, it is true that one area might be or might read a little bit drier than the other, but I would always listen to the one that says it's damper as opposed to drier, if that makes sense. Also, I'm aware that I'm in this video just literally chit-chatting about planty things. If you've got any questions, please do drop them down below and I will try and reply and help in any way I can. But yes, so there are specific questions that I will probably circle back to this issue on, but just be very, very careful about overwatering because it is, as I say, the biggest killer. But the next question I had was, I'm getting so many yellow leaves, is this normal? Yes, it 100% is. I was going around and I was doing some plant care of my own this morning, and I was picking off so many yellow leaves from my plants, because especially the ones that, like all of my hanging plants above me, I'll put a clip in so you can see, but all of my hanging plants above me don't have any grow light on them or anything like that, and they are in really quite low light. I had quite a few yellow leaves on them, and I did last year, and I did I think the year before that as well. It is just kind of standard if you can't give your plants as much light as they need. I would say like there are certain types of plant that are a little bit more tolerant. For example, my certain types of philodendron, like my philodendron Brazil, for example, or my Epipremnum aureum, my pothos plant, those kind of plants will often drop a leaf or two as they're adjusting and then be absolutely fine. However, with some types of tropical plant that need much higher levels of light, if they start yellowing, then I would kind of go, oh, okay, I think we need to change something up. Like for example, if my Philodendron Glorious, if it lost maybe 1 or 2 leaves at the bottom, I wouldn't worry too much, just because that's letting go of older growth, which is a very normal thing for plants to do as they try and conserve their energy and essentially kind of store their energy up for new growth. However, if it started to lose multiple leaves going up the vine, or even if leaves towards the top started to yellow, that's when I would think to myself, okay, something needs to be done here. As I've already said, I would check the roots first. But upping the light is often the best place to start. And I've spoken already about moving things closer to windows. Keeping your windows clean is something that I'm very bad at doing. I'm being such a hypocrite here. But if you don't have a huge amount of natural light, keeping your windows clean is so important at this time of year, because any build-up of dust or dirt or anything like that on the windows essentially is like having a sheer curtain or something like that hanging in front of your window, and means that your plants can't absorb as much light as they want to. The same absolutely applies to keeping your plants' leaves clean, giving them regular wipe downs, because again, a buildup of dust and dirt will mean that they're not able to photosynthesize as well as they could. But yes, so obviously moving things closer to the window, but if you don't have that luxury, or you have moved everything you possibly can closer to the windows and you're still having this issue, that is when we go on to grow lights. And I know someone said, do I need to use grow lights? I've never used grow lights and I don't know where to start. Honestly, I think it is made out to be much more complicated than it actually is. I've actually got a thing that I will put a clip in of, and I got it on Amazon for about £20, and you don't need to spend £20 on something like this. There are apps and stuff like that that you can get and download on your phone. They're not quite as accurate, so I would recommend something like this. But you can get light meters, and basically it will just tell you how bright or dark a light is, and what I think it uses foot candles or lumens, and what that represents in terms of bright light, medium light, bright and direct light, all that sort of stuff. So for example, my SANSI lights that I'll put a clip in of, those ones are in my collection. Out of all the grow lights I own, those ones are the most powerful lights. Like honestly, the light they put off is absolutely insane. So if you're looking to grow really, really high light tropical plants or succulents or something like that, then I would highly recommend something like that. Whereas, for example, the grow light I've got just under my TV there, that's one of my mother grow lights, and it provides fantastic light for plants at a much closer range. So it really depends on your setup, and it depends how close you want to have grow lights. Again, in my cabinet here, again, I've got mother grow lights. These are a different type, but these ones are perfect for creating bright and direct light for plants in a contained area. Whereas if I was to put them much, much higher and expect them to work at the same height as my SANSI grow lights, I wouldn't be getting that amount of light. However, if I was to get a very powerful bright SANSI light and put that in my cabinet, chances are it would scorch and burn everything in there, because it would just be too much. So I think it's just about thinking or looking at the space you're looking to fill. If you decide on where you want to put your grow lights before you set out to buy them, then it will give you a much better indication as to what you actually need. I've got very cheap and cheerful grow lights off Amazon in the past as well. In fact, I still use some in some of my smaller cabinets in my home, and they work fine. They work absolutely fine at again, a very close range. If I was to have them, like, even trying to fill that space, they probably wouldn't work. But yeah, the other thing that I always find really useful is I find it useful looking at other people's spaces and other people's setups and thinking, okay, if they've got an alocasia growing underneath that light and that's working well for them, then chances are, if I position it in a similar way, then it will work well for me as well. Yeah, I'll put some clips in of the lights that I've got on my plants so that you can see the distance that I've got and what's working well for me. But that's really, you can go into all the kind of the PAR light systems and stuff like that. And if you do want to get a better understanding of that area, kind of maybe a little bit more in-depth and scientific, then I've made a full breakdown video on that on my channel a couple of years ago. So I will link that video down in the description box below. But you don't actually, in my opinion, you don't really need to know that stuff. I think that is where it gets a little bit complicated. And I remember when I was first starting to think about maybe getting a grow light, like when I'd never used one before, I was like, oh my God, there are so many to choose from. How do I even know where to get started? Do I get a really cheap one? Do I get a really expensive one? Do I get an LED? Do I get a halogen? And pretty much exclusively, all of the grow lights I use nowadays are LED, purely for the fact that they are just very cost efficient to run. Even though sometimes they have a higher upfront cost to buy, they've got a much longer like lifespan. They will, like, some of the lights I've got, like, in fact the mother grow lights, I know they are quite expensive to buy, but you can just replace the LED strip if anything ever happens to them. You don't need to ever buy a new light, so they will essentially last you forever. So if you think you're going to be into plants for quite a long time, then that is probably the way I would go, LED wise. And yeah, as I say, obviously the much more powerful lights, like my big SANSI lights that I've already spoken about, they are more expensive to run compared to ones that run at a lower level, like the ones in here. But typically LEDs are always going to be cheaper to run. One of the things that I've mentioned before as well, which is a really good kind of money saving tip if you want to introduce grow lights but you're worried about the cost of running them, is if you get, I used to use tin foil actually, but I was going to say any kind of reflective material, you can actually kind of cheat it to create more light for your plants. So for example, if I was to position my grow lights in my cabinet facing the back wall a little bit more and then put a layer of tin foil running down the back, it would essentially reflect off that and create even more light for my plants. So yeah, you can do that with pretty much any setup at all. You can place reflective things to reflect from the grow light. Again, it's one of the reasons why I've got some mirrors above the doors that I'll again put a clip in of. I've got some mirrors that I put there not because they looked great, but because that is an area of this room that gets very little natural light. And I was like, maybe if I put mirrors there, it can bounce some light off the window. And it's worked really well. And I am actually able to grow some low light plants over in that area now, which is nice. It's just kind of about playing about with things. And again, it's kind of the fun of growing plants, the experimentation and seeing what works and seeing what doesn't. And I know that can be really, really scary when you just want to get it right. But like, as I say, we've all made errors with planty things. Like, it is how you learn. I have done so much wrong over the years. I still do so much wrong with my plants, and I still lose plants from time to time, and I lose leaves. And as I say, like, I just think that you get such a, like, it's all well and good me kind of sitting here talking about things, but you get a much better understanding by actually doing. So yeah, take everything I'm saying with a pinch of salt and try it yourself at home. But yeah, that is quite a useful little trick that I've used over the years. Oh, and this is a question that I've had so much recently. Someone said, I have little black flies everywhere. I assume they're fungus gnats. How can I get rid of them? So fungus gnats they literally look like fruit flies, and they can, if you've got lots of plants, they can absolutely dominate your collection so quickly, and they are such a pain. They really are. They can be, if you don't know how to go about it in the right way, they can be such a pain to get rid of, because although killing the adults is what you think you probably should do, what you actually want to be doing is focusing on stopping the breeding cycle. Because even if you manage to get rid of all of the adult flies, chances are in the next week or so you're going to notice lots more of them, because they will have laid eggs in the soil, and then that will have, again, just started the whole thing all over again. And I have tried so many things, like a relentless amount of things over the years in order to eradicate fungus gnats. And the only thing that personally, I say the only thing, I honestly do think if you've got hundreds of plants, you're probably going to have one or two from time to time. But the only thing that I find to be like ridiculously effective is nematodes. And I know some people can be really reluctant to use nematodes, and I get it, but also, so basically, for those of you that don't know, nematodes, they come in little packets and it looks just like kind of like a paste or a powder. You can't see anything with the naked eye. But what it actually is microscopic eelworms. And what you do is you mix them up with your water and you water your plants through as normal, and they will essentially feed on the fungus gnat larvae in the soil or in the substrate, and they will stop the breeding cycle. And I think people are just often really freaked out when you say eelworms. Like, it sounds gross, but literally you can't see anything. You would not even know that they're there. The scarab fly nematodes as well, they are pet safe, because I know there's some types of nematodes outdoors that I do believe can be harmful to animals if they're ingested. The scarab fly ones are pet safe. And you literally wouldn't even know they were there. Like, they will never leave the pot of your plant, and chances are they'll die off themselves quite quickly. All you'll notice is that the black flies stop, and that is surely the answer. And the good thing about nematodes as well is that they have lots of beneficial uses for the soil of your plant. Like, they are amazing when it comes to aiding soil health. So you're actually doing your plants loads of favours, as well as just getting rid of fungus gnats. If you feel like you just want to get rid of the adults, then I would say yellow sticky traps are the way forward. Again, fungus gnats are just like drawn to the colour yellow, and they'll fly into them, they'll get stuck, and then you can just discard those. But I highly recommend using something to stop the breeding cycle. And I know there's things like mosquito bits and stuff like that. I think they can be quite good. I have used them in the past, but again, as I've mentioned, I am so focused nowadays, firstly on soil health within my plants, because I think a healthy soil equals healthier plants. But also just like efficiency and effectiveness and doing things naturally. And nematodes have been the best thing in the world. So I was going to say, I'll link everything I'm talking about down in the description box below. So do your own research, like have a read up on things, see what you think might work for you. But that is my personal recommendation. What I will typically do is, especially at this time of year, every kind of like 6 to 12 weeks, I will just do a little water with nematodes. You can't go overboard with them either. Like, so I was going to say, I made a fungus gnat wrap a while ago as a short on YouTube and Instagram and stuff.
Now into the magical wonders of nematodes. See, they're microscopic worms. Let's ignore that fact.
Talking about fungus gnats now, I loved using nematodes, and I literally just feel like I am quoting my rap now. But yeah, you can't go overboard with them. I just water them through.
You just water them through. You can't go overboard.
But yeah, that is what I would recommend. So just quickly going back to what I'm doing with the plant here. As you can see, I've got its main root system out of sphagnum moss to the best of my ability, and I'm now just going through and I'm loosening the roots in the moss pole, because I could just extend this moss pole, but I do have some slightly bigger ones that I would like to get onto instead. And while the root system isn't absolutely ginormous and really mature, I thought it was a good time to just do a rough detangle, pull the roots through this moss pole and get it started in a brand new way. So that is what I'm going to do. I'm keeping all the moss to one side because I will reuse that when I do it. And then one of you said, my plants seem to have stopped growing. And this is very similar to what I said when I was talking about yellowing leaves or losing leaves towards the bottom of the plants. Essentially, dormancy in plants around this time of year is just your plants conserving their energy. Like, they are not getting enough to put out growth, if that makes sense, because plants gather their nutrients. Depending on the type of plant, they gather their nutrients from all sorts of places. They gather it from the sun, from the soil or whatever you're growing them in, from the fertiliser, even from the humidity in the air. And if those things are lacking, then your plant isn't going to have enough energy to give you a new leaf. So it will often sacrifice some of the growth that it's got, for example, yellowing leaves, or it will just essentially take a little break and then burst back into growth in the growing season when the spring starts. I do, like, as I've said already in this video, I do absolutely know it is possible to keep your plants growing as normal all year round without these periods of dormancy. But what you really need to look at, again, is like firstly your plant's natural habitat, but assuming you're growing tropical plants, you just want to think about how you can provide them with the right light, water, humidity, fertiliser, temperature, all of these things to essentially replicate their natural growing conditions and therefore keep them as happy as can be, and then you'll be able to keep them growing. A period of dormancy also isn't a bad thing. I just want to say, if you do let your plants go a little bit dormant during the winter months and they're not growing, that's okay. Like, that is okay. It doesn't mean that your plants are going to die. I've got several plants that are in the bedroom at the moment that, in fact, even my big euphorbias, which are the ones that look like massive cacti, I've got several of those next door that haven't grown at all this year, like have not grown in the slightest. I haven't got them under grow lights or anything like that. And although it kind of breaks my heart that I don't feel like I am growing them. I feel like I'm just kind of storing them at the moment. I firstly just don't have the space for those plants to get any bigger. So unless I want to chop them or get rid of them, I kind of have to let them go a little bit dormant. But also I have grown plants like that, like in various places I've lived over the years, and I've let them go dormant for periods of time. And then when I've reintroduced good growing conditions, they have burst back into life again. So I think in a period of dormancy, it's still very important to make sure that your plant's conditions are stable. It's not as simple as being like, oh, well, I don't want to grow this plant very big anymore, so I'm going to put it in this spot over here and just let it go dormant, because your plant might die. They still do need some light and some of the conditions you were providing before. It's just that they might be able to cope a little bit better with not having like optimum conditions. And plants are, on the whole, I know there's some that are very finicky and very sensitive, but on the whole, they are way more resilient than we give them credit for. Like, they will often look, even if you don't think your plants look beautiful, they will often look so much better in your home environment than they would ever do in their natural habitat, where they are being beaten by wind and rain and animals brushing past them and things getting lopped over and chopped down and periods of drought for weeks on end and then rainy seasons and all this sort of stuff. So really, this is all stuff that your plants are used to dealing with. Like, they're not on any kind of schedule in nature. So yeah, I think it's just important to remind ourselves of that from time to time. And talking of scheduling as well, I know I often get questions from you guys, and this is something that I always come back to again, talking about, should we be scheduling our watering? Like, is it a good idea? For example, if you've got really used to watering your plant once a week over the spring and summer months, is it then a good idea to go down to a week and a half? And I always say, don't schedule your watering. Like, I know sometimes practically it can be a useful thing to do if you forget, for example. But what I would say is, if you're going to schedule anything, schedule your checkups on your plants. And if on those days, for example, I'm looking at one of my alocasias right now, if I know that plant likes to be watered roughly once a week, cool, set a schedule for once a week. But if I go back to that plant in a week's time and I don't think it's ready, or if I'm in any doubt as to whether or not it's ready, set another schedule for a few days' time. Go back, check on it then, and reevaluate. Don't be like, oh, well, I mean, my schedule says it's been a week, so I'm going to go ahead and water it, because that is honestly a surefire way to create issues with your plants. And that is one thing that you can absolutely do yourself to not have issues. Also, I might need my focus for a second, because this is where I don't want to chop this moss pole. I want to just be able to niftily guide its aerial roots. Oh no, I didn't break it off. Niftily guide its aerial roots through the gaps, and then I can reposition them in the new moss pole. Is that going to happen? You know what, that worked really well. Look at all of those aerial roots. Perfect. Right, new moss pole time. And these are moss poles that, I know I've said it before, I all for DIY, make it yourself, and also supporting small businesses, but these are just cheap and cheerful ones from Amazon. I got them when I was in need of a moss pole very quickly a few months ago, and I was actually really impressed with them, and they arrived the next day. So yeah, I have got some more of them, and these ones that I've got are very similar to the one that I was just using, but they are a little bit thicker and a little bit longer. So I will put this plant onto its new moss pole, and then I will just continue to extend it with this size going forwards. Because this plant is actually a really fast grower. It's growing way quicker than I thought it would. It's a beautiful philodendron, but it is one that really wants to climb. So yeah, a moss pole is a very good idea. I was going to say as well, with fungus gnats, be aware that they do often lay their eggs in damp moss poles, and it's really important to keep your moss poles damp. So again, I will regularly just water through with nematodes to make sure that I don't have any eggs or anything nasty like that lurking in there. So the fiddly bit in this is now going to be getting these aerial roots into the new moss pole. But the next question was, and this kind of leads quite nicely on actually, was should I be fertilising at this time of year? And we've just spoken about dormancy in houseplants, and I personally, I do fertilise my plants all year round. However, I will absolutely stop that if I notice that a plant has gone a little bit dormant. If it's not currently giving me any new growth, if it's stopped growing, I stop fertilising. And I know a lot of the time people kind of think, oh, well, you know what, maybe I can trick my plant back into growth by giving it loads of nutrients, and I'm afraid it just doesn't work like that. You're more likely to actually cause issues by doing things this way, because your plant will likely just go into shock and not be very happy at all. So yeah, if you are able, as I say again, like I know I am, I'm sorry, I know I'm waffling and repeating myself, but if you are able to keep the conditions for your plant as stable as possible, and you are therefore able to keep your plants actively growing, then yes, 100% continue fertilising. If you're not, then that's absolutely fine as well. Treat it as a little break for your plants. Give the soil or substrate, whatever you're using, semi-hydro, whatever it is, give it a proper flush through, get rid of all that mineral build-up that often comes with fertilising a lot. I do that typically, I try to do it. I used to try to do it every month. Realistically now it is probably a couple of times a year. But yeah, I will try and do that when I think of it, and if I have got a plant that I'm laying off the fertiliser with, it's just kind of good practice to give the substrate a little flush. And there's no harm as well in giving your plants a little break, like unless you're growing something in a substrate such as semi-hydro that doesn't have any well, I mean, I know some semi-hydro does have added fertiliser, but assuming you're growing in something like the Soil Ninja mix, which is what I use, it has no added fertiliser at all. If your plant is giving you, for example, if you've got an anthurium that is putting out new growth and it's in a substrate that has 0 nutrients, then yes, you probably do need to add in a bit of fertiliser. But on the whole, especially if you're growing something in soil, if you do have a period where you don't fertilise that often, it's fine. It's absolutely fine. Your plants are more than capable, firstly, of surviving and growing in very low nutrients, but also they will be gathering so much of what they need from the soil anyway, so long as you're using a good quality soil. Again, personally, I like to get my soils from Soil Ninja. This is just what I like to do. Before I fill this any more, what I would like to do is I'd like to just get this section potted up and then tie, in fact, I'm going to tie it to the moss pole first, just so that it's really stable. And one of you said, are heat mats worth it? I think it really depends on the context in which you're using heat mats for. I've used them before myself, and they can be absolutely brilliant. But typically, personally, I would just, I mean, this is obviously based on my conditions in my home, I would just use them for propagation most of the time nowadays. If, for example, if you don't have, oh, that's really short. If you don't have central heating and you need to raise the temperature a little bit, I think they're good if you can create like a sealed space for your plants. Like, for example, if you've got a little cabinet, or even if you put your plants into like a big version of one of these boxes, like a big storage box, something like that, and put a heat mat underneath it. This is kind of why I say about propagation. But then they are fantastic because they really heat up that specific area. Whereas if you're just putting them under your plant's pots, although in some cases that can be okay, I have found, I'm trying to work out what pot to use, I have found that they can sometimes just dry out the roots and the substrate of your plant really, really quickly and actually not provide that much heat to the plant above, which kind of defeats the point. Soil I mixed up. So yeah, I do think heat mats are fantastic. What I personally did when I was growing loads of my plants in a very, very cold space, like I grew loads of my plants for years actually in my mum's conservatory when I moved back home for a while. I think I was there for a year and a half, 2 years. I was at home for a while with all my plants. And I, as I say, was growing them in her conservatory that although it did have underfloor heating, we had so many arguments about this. My mum and her boyfriend were so reluctant to ever put it on. So a lot of the time during the winter months, it was freezing in there. It was absolutely freezing. And my plants were really suffering. Honestly, it was such a stressful time. They were all like, they were in a very unhappy way. And that's when I first started playing about with things like heat mats. But one thing I found worked really well is the little plug-in oil radiators. I don't mean like fan heaters. They're almost like plug-in storage heaters. They produce a lot of heat. They're not ridiculously expensive to run. And what you can do is you can kind of leave bowls of water or cups of water on top of them if you don't want to run a humidifier like alongside that. And essentially as they get very, very warm, the water will evaporate and it'll kind of balance out the dry air produced from the radiator. In fact, even nowadays with our central heating here, sometimes I will put, oh, that is someone at the Thank you, Yoli. This could be Christmas shopping, bear with. Oh yeah, that was something that I'd ordered for Ross arriving. But what was I saying? Heat mats, plug-in radiators, humidity. Yeah, as I say, that is something that with the cups on top of the radiators, that is something that I do from time to time, even here. And I do have a humidifier, and I do run my humidifier, but I don't run it on like a daily basis. I typically will just run it when either I see that the humidity's dropped very low. I've got a little meter that I can, like, again, very cheap on Amazon. I've got it on my desk and I can see how high the humidity is in here. I will either run it when I see it's got like below 50%, just because I like to try and keep the humidity at least at 50% if I possibly can. But a lot of the time I will just put cups of water on the radiator and it does work really quite well. Also, I'm just going to fill the moss pole, but it's obviously a little bit facing weird directions at the moment because it's been used to growing in a certain way. But this is what my Philodendron glorious is looking like. It looks glorious. It's such a beautiful plant. So yeah, although I don't need to fill all of the moss now, I'm just going to do it just so I don't have to do it further down the line. But that was the question on heat mats. As I say, propagation or propagation bins, the big ones, fantastic. Also, what you can absolutely do, and you can do this at any time of year, but it can be a really useful trick to do over the winter months, is put your plants that will fit into transparent storage boxes and then put them on a heat mat and put them under a grow light, and oh my god, you will barely have to do anything to them until the spring. They will become so low maintenance. I do that a lot of the time, to be honest. If I've got a plant, like a plant that I'm resetting, if I've chopped it right back, or one that I'm just like, I like it, but I can't really be bothered to look after it at the moment, I'll be like, cool, put it in a prop bin, go away, come back to it, see how you feel. And a lot of the time you'll come back to it and it will have given you beautiful growth and you'll be like, ah, I love the plant again. Yeah, I do that a lot. But the next question was, how do you balance humidity and temperature? And similarly to what I just said, humidity obviously does need to be cranked up if you've got central heating on, because central heating produces so much dry air. Commonly that's when you're going to see things like browning edges, crispy leaves, like dark tips. That is your plant's response to very dry air, because again, these are tropical plants a lot of the time and they do typically prefer higher levels of humidity. Hence why I put like cups of water on the radiators when they're on and all that sort of stuff. I think the key with temperature over the winter months is just trying to keep something fairly steady. Your plants, as I say, are more resilient a lot of the time than you give them credit for, and they can cope with colder drops in temperature. Ideally, I would say try not to let it drop below about 15 degrees Celsius. I'll put whatever that is in Fahrenheit on the screen. But do your best not to let it drop any more than that if you possibly can, just because that is when you're likely to start encountering issues, not just dormancy. Because a lack of temperature typically will just lead to your plant's growth slowing right down and, again, potentially a little bit of dormancy. But again, I say steady temperature just because you want to also try and make sure, and I know it's so difficult when you're, like, especially if you're not home a lot, like if you're going away for a few days or whatever, but just try and make sure that you're keeping things on a fairly even keel, whereby it's not dropping to 15 degrees at night and then you're cranking it up to like 30 degrees Celsius in the day, because that is a lot of adjusting for your plants to do. And also that's a lot just be keeping on top of in terms of like balancing humidity with temperature and stuff like that. Honestly, again, I don't think it's something that you need to massively overthink. I think a lot of this stuff is way simpler than it actually sounds. I'm hoping I'm not making it sound really, really complicated as I talk through it. But yeah, the gist of it is I've got a humidifier. I run it when the heating's on. When it's off, a lot of the time I don't need to. Also, the next thing I'd like to do is this beautiful anthurium. I'm pretty sure this is a Bessier Af. What is it? I can't remember what the hybrid is now. It's a Bessier Af cross something else. I'll put it on the screen. But it's just giving me that beautiful new leaf. But it's currently just in the cup that I got it in, and it's in no drainage at all, and there's no space for a reservoir at the bottom. So I'm just gonna transition it to something probably a little bit bigger, and either with some drainage or with space for me to create a reservoir. I haven't really decided yet. There we go. Oh yeah, in fact, prime example of root rot. So this one has been growing in this container for a while now with no drainage, and I can see most of the roots look healthy. Oh god, I'm dropping stuff on my laptop. So all of these roots here are really thick, full and healthy, whereas if you look at these ones down here, they are sludgy and, oh yeah, I feel like that would almost just pull away. So I'm going to chop them right back. And fortunately, because the majority of this plant's root system is okay, I'm not going to need to worry about like hydrogen peroxide soaking or anything like that. But yeah, I'm going to give its roots a fairly big prune back. I just give them a very good check over. In fact, I'm kind of thinking maybe just while I monitor this plant as the roots adjust, I might actually get it into sphagnum moss. That feels like a fairly safe bet, just as it's regrowing. I have no doubt that this plant will be fine, as I say, because there are so many healthy roots there, but just to be on the safe side. But yeah, balancing temperature and humidity, all I will say is just do your best in general for your plants to just try and keep all of the conditions as consistent as you can manage. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect, and your plants are adaptable and they will adapt. But yeah, any massive fluctuation can cause drama. It doesn't mean it will, but it can. It has the potential to. So I always find it's easier to stop the issues before they've started, hence why I put precautions in place, but that is just how I like to do things. One of you said, is it still advisable to ship plants? I mean, obviously you can't, like, of course you can buy plants all year round. I personally don't import any plants over the winter period. You can absolutely take the risk if you want, but my God, it's a risk even when the weather's gorgeous. I feel like it's not a risk that I personally would be willing to take over the winter months. If I'm gonna buy plants, I will ship them next day delivery if possible, from within the UK. And I will often say to sellers, if I chuck you a bit of extra money, would you be able to include some heat packs if that's not already an option, just because you don't want your plant getting to you half dead. But it's your choice at the end of the day. I just think it's a good idea to be a bit cautious about these things. So yeah, in fact, I think I'm going to go in with the container that I was growing the Philodendron Glorious in before. Again, I know a lot of people will say, and probably rightly so, that I should be rinsing this out and sterilising it. If I'm working with two very healthy plants, this one has been growing perfectly for me, no health concerns or anything like that, no pests, no root issues. I just do a direct transfer and I never really have issues from doing it that way. If I was giving you the perfect advice, I'd say go and sterilise your cup, but it works fine for me. So one of you said, do you get overwhelmed with plant drama? And yes, of course I do. I think all of us do from time to time. And in fact, I was talking to a friend the other day who's got into houseplants like pretty majorly over the last year. And she was saying, oh my God, it is so stressful when everything has just been plain sailing and she's been building her collection really nicely. And then all of a sudden, all of the winter issues start kicking in, and it can happen almost overnight. Like, actually, I've noticed it a lot in the last couple of weeks. Everything has suddenly gone from being absolutely fine to finding pests here or this and that there. Oh, that's the other thing I was very quickly going to touch on. Obviously, it is pesty season at the moment, but dry air from central heating radiators also commonly leads to spider mites, and that is one of the biggest pests at this time of year that will affect your plants. Hence why, again, I say increasing the humidity is another good idea because they hate that. I have also made specific pesty videos before on how I deal and treat with pests, but if you would like any more information on that, please do drop me a comment and I will try and help. But yes, going back to what I was just saying, I absolutely do get overwhelmed with planty things sometimes. I think as tempting as it is to continue building your collection all year round, on the whole, I say this, I have actually just ordered some plants on a Black Friday sale, but on the whole, I will typically say at this time of year, I try to just conserve and look at what I've already got and deal with what's in front of me instead of trying to build my collection in the same way as I was before, just because there likely are going to be more things going wrong. And while that can be overwhelming, and this is going to sound so silly, it is almost like an opportunity to bond with the plants that you've got a little bit more. And again, the same friend that I was talking about that was saying, oh my God, all of a sudden, like, things feel a little bit overwhelming. She said something really lovely the other day. She was like, there was something going on with her Philodendron Gloriosum. I think it had thrips. In fact, it did have thrips. And she was treating that plant. And she was like, this is a plant that has been very straightforward, hasn't given me any grief. And I can't remember exactly how she put it, but she said something really lovely, basically saying that, like, by treating the plant and doing stuff to it, it's made her feel like she knows it a little bit better or something. And I really get that because I've got plants that are so straightforward, and every now and again when one of them goes wrong and I have to sit down and I have to spend some time kind of wiping it over or changing its soil or checking its roots or anything like that, it does just make me feel a little bit more connected to that plant. So yeah, but I don't think it's a bad thing to feel overwhelmed, because as planty people, we take on so much responsibility. Honestly, I know this is a lovely, relaxing, gentle, calming hobby a lot of the time, but we also give ourselves so much responsibility. Like it's like having a pet. It's like we are responsible for keeping all of these things alive. And it might seem really easy when everything's going right, but the second things start to go wrong, it can be overwhelming. So yeah, just breathe, try to still enjoy it. Like it's just kind of part of it when you've got plants. Like it does take it out of you sometimes. And I've spoken about it on my channel before, but I go through big ups and downs with, at times, like complete burnout from plants, and I'll have to step away and kind of give things away and put things into propagation bins and stuff like that, and then I'll come back to them when I'm feeling a little bit better, which typically is fairly soon after. Like I don't tend to go through like months on end of burnout personally, but it is just one of those things. And I think, like, remember and remind yourself that this is a hobby and it is meant to be a lovely, nice thing, and just get what you can out of it, and that we all go through it as well, because there's always drama. But those are the gist of the questions. There's more I could probably go into, but I feel like I have, oh, and my battery's about to die as well. Oh, in fact, it's literally about to die, bear with me. Yeah, I feel like I have covered a lot of bases in this video and done my classic thing of just kind of talking at you. So I really hope this has been understandable, and I hope it's been useful. And as I say, please do let me know in the comments if there's anything you would like me to cover further in a video, or something you just want a quick question answered, or whatever. But I really hope, firstly, if you were doing planty stuff along with this video, I hope you got lots done. I know I only got through a couple of things, but I'm happy with the things that I got through, and I will crack on with more in another video soon. But if you did enjoy this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, have a lovely day, and I will see you in the next video.
Stay sexy, plant lovers.